Welcome to Africa to You. I'm Vivian Birchall, your host. Africa is not labeled as an innovation hub, but it is home to some of the most significant inventions. A large number of inventions are developed to meet the needs of local communities in predominantly poor economies. Case in point, malaria. It is estimated that malaria costs the African economy almost 1.5% of its GDP. Last year, a non-invasive malaria test called Matibabu, developed by Ugandan university students, won the Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation. The invention is being tested in partnership with the National Hospital and is expected to give results in 1 minute with no need to draw blood. However, the continent has also produced some high-tech inventions to address global issues in the healthcare, banking, navigation, space, energy, and artificial intelligence fields. MIT recognizes African potential, and for 8 years, the MIT Africa Club has hosted an Africa Innovate conference. As part of the Africans in Boston, I attended last year's conference on the theme Digitization of Africa, which attracted a cross-section of participants, including MIT alumni, business leaders, and advisors from Africa and the United States, politicians, and members of the diaspora. Today, my guest is Yusuf Aroub, who is the chair of the MIT Africa Innovate Conference. Yusuf, welcome to Africa to You.
Thank you so much for having me, Vivian.
What is MIT Africa Innovate Conference?
Yeah, so the Africa Innovate Conference, like you said, in its 9th year, is a forum where we get entrepreneurs, students, business people, we get alumni, professors, experts, and people who are interested in Africa to talk about the continent, to talk about a specific topic. So like you said, last year was about digitalization and its role in the growth of the African economies. This year, it's about celebrating what has been done in Africa, but also trying to learn from it in order to aspire for an Africa whose innovations are exported, respected, and are envied by the rest of the world. And so for us, the conference is a meeting place where like-minded people with an interest, with a stake in the success of the continent can meet, learn from each other, build connections, and hopefully in the future help out the continent if they're not already doing so. So for us students, it's aspiring to see people who have succeeded and to try to emulate some of the things they have done and hopefully stand on their shoulders to do even more.
It's not often that we hear of innovations from Africa. What are some of the significant innovations from Africa, and why has your team chosen the theme Made in Africa?
Yeah, so I think up to now, the view of Africa is always that it's part of the supply chain of the world, right? Things are made there, but then they go to Europe, Asia, and elsewhere. A lot of it also has to do with there are very few examples that people keep talking about all the time. What we wanted to do is kind of talk about what is currently happening in Africa that is worth celebrating. So for example, yes, some of the biggest companies are building their manufacturing hubs in Africa, whether it's Boeing, Volkswagen, and others. But there are also local companies. For example, a local company in Accra, Ghana, that is working on eyewear and making it much more affordable than it currently is, and building it and manufacture it in Ghana. Rwanda is working on manufacturing the first full mobile phone in Rwanda. You have now Moroccan designed cars, right? Instead of having the design and the creative part done in Germany and then just the manufacturing in Morocco, you now have people who are actually building a knowledge base. And that trickles down into more training for people, right? It trickles down into more job possibilities, but it also trickles down into the other parts of the economy where, for example, service economy, that are really an important part of the African experience. Now, I think when we talk about innovations, what I think I've been seeing from the research we've been doing and some of the guests that we will have at the conference is that a lot of the time what's being done is using things that we know here, but making it the African way. Meaning, yes, for example, mobile phones have existed in the US, but you and I both know that they've had an outweighed influence in Africa in developing commerce, in developing fintech solutions, in also developing just agrotech solutions. So, for example, the one that we hear about a lot is M-Pesa, right?
Right.
But there's Pega, there's Flutterwave, a company that just signed a $100 million deal with Visa that facilitate mobile payments. And so Africa has been a leader in mobile payments mainly because there's so much friction in the normal, more official banking system.
Right.
And so for people who are trying to do transactions, and many of them in one day, that makes it a cost-effective way of doing so.
Why has there been friction?
I mean, there's, friction is structural, friction is governmental, friction, for example, for some of the banks just comes from the fact that they have been protected for a long time by near monopolies, right? They've been protected by the government, by legislation, and in order for them to be competitive, they need to have a market to serve. And so giving them that market made it easy for them to grow.
Yeah.
And if you can think about it, a lot of the countries in Africa have grown from government-aided policies.
Right.
And so for the normal person, the entrepreneur, and we're not talking tech entrepreneurship like Silicon Valley, we're talking the bootstrap type of entrepreneur. These payment systems, these fintech solutions have helped them be able to grow their market, be able to take on risks, be able to get funding when before they did not have it.
Right.
One of the panels that we have at the conference, agrotech, agriculture, when you sell all that you actually reaped in a year, you have a lot of money. But then when you come to actually, later on that year, when you come to actually kind of sow the seeds, you may run out of money really quickly. So for example, there have been solutions that have been able to kind of predict the credit worthiness of farmers, that have worked to try to understand and predict and forecast what they will get next year in order for them to get loans in order to be able to operate for the year. So sometimes it's very small innovations, but that make a big difference. So I think to us, these innovations are done the African way, in the sense that they understand the realities of the people on the ground. Whether these people are African or not, most of them are, but even if they are from other countries living in Africa, the main distinction in these innovations, and the ones that do very well, is that they understand their customers, and they don't try to repeat things that worked in Asia or North America or Europe. They try to tailor the solutions to the problems that are currently faced by their customers.
It's interesting you mentioned that because there has been a tendency in the past for many people to bring in products that work in the developed countries, and they can't work in the African communities because of the setup. Right. And so just like you mentioned M-Pesa, one of the reasons it succeeded was if you look at the setup of the African people, they like to share, they're very communal. Yep. It's, sending money over the phone. It started with sending airtime, sharing airtime.
Exactly.
So I completely agree. And I know you're from Morocco, right?
Yeah.
Or an immigrant from Morocco, but you must be proud of the auto industry that is developing there, right?
Yeah, and I think it's an important part. So to me, services and hospitality, for example, are great indicators in a quality that a country feels of itself, but also is able to showcase. Right. I think it takes a lot of organization. It takes an understanding of the strength. I mean, there are some amazing things to go visit in Africa, right? Mm-hmm. But it's always sometimes the usual suspects, right? Whether it's Kenya, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, South Africa, Morocco, Egypt. But I mean, go beyond that, Mm-hmm. Senegal, Mali, Ivory Coast. You have, there is so much more tourism to be done, and these countries are now waking up to this potential. Right. And the fact that people want to have genuine experiences. So I think, not only does hospitality develop through training mm-hmm. Our people, but it also showcases to other people what Africa is really about. And I think one thing that it can do very well is shed some stereotypes, like you right. said. It can awaken to a potential, and I'd like to think that every visitor that goes to Africa, or maybe anywhere else in the world, it's a way for them to discover something they may not have known, right?
Right.
And to see also the reality, right? Like we like to talk about innovation, and we are all optimistic about the future. But there are certain realities that they can play difference into making sure that that optimism becomes, the potential and the optimism becomes reality. So for me, as a Moroccan, when I see people visit, Morocco, I want them to get a genuine experience. I want them to enjoy it. I want them to see how beautiful things are.
Right.
But I also want them to see the reality, and to try to see how can they make a difference.
So, who is eligible to participate in the MIT Africa Innovate Conference, and what's the application process?
Yeah, so to participate can mean two things. One could be as a speaker or as a panelist, and we normally reach out through the MIT Africa umbrella. So MIT Africa is an organization within MIT that supports all the endeavors on the African continent, whether that be liaison with companies, sending students for internships, whether it is sponsorship of prizes and competitions. For example, the MIT Legatum Center, which is the Center of Entrepreneurship in Developing Countries and Emerging Markets, has a prize called the Zambezi Prize, which is in the fall every year. So there are ways that we subsidize entrepreneurship, and we help entrepreneurs in Africa, but then there's also ways for MIT Africa to help students and companies who want to match with MIT talent. So
Right.
the way to participate normally is we reach out to potential speakers or panelists that we think would be great for the conference. And then what we love is to get an email or solicitation by people who think that they can add to the conference as a speaker or as a panelist or through a workshop. And that's normally how we go. So there is no application in that sense, right? We want to make it quite democratic. We want to make it so that there is an ability for most people who have something to say to be able to say it. So there's that way of participating. The second way that you can participate is to come to the conference, to buy a ticket and to come there. And I think you probably saw it last year.
Yeah.
You meet some amazing people.
Yes, you do.
And not only do you meet some amazing people, but you meet people as well who have a lot of potential, who have interest, but who may not have had the chance yet to make a difference on the continent. And you see that connection being built. And you see people who are established, meet people maybe who are less established on the continent, and you see contacts being made, new opportunities that come through. And so to me, participation comes from two ways. And I think both ways are amazing ways to be there and to partake in that beautiful experience that is the day.
You mentioned signing up. Is there a fee? Do people have to
Yes,
pay?
definitely. So we have to pay for this conference, although I will say that we try to make the fees as low as possible in order to get as many people to come. So, for example, if you're a student, it's $30 early bird, $40 regular. If you are a professional, it's $90 early bird, $125. And when you actually look at the spectrum of all conferences about Africa, or just conferences at MIT, those are by far the cheapest prices. And we do it in a way because our sponsors make it possible.
Oh.
So some of our sponsors are African. OCP, which is a large fertilizer mining company and one of the big phosphate producers in the world. Royal Air Maroc, which is the flagship carrier of Morocco. We have BCG, which is a consulting company. Genser Energy, which provides energy across Africa. And then we have internal MIT sponsors. So they make it possible so that we can reduce the price of tickets and make it accessible to everybody. Plus, you're going to get great food.
Yeah,
drinks,
I
hors
remember the
d'oeuvres.
food last year.
So really the price is well worth it to spend a day with us.
Right. And I mean, last year it was also a win for me because I got to meet the World Remit founder, Mr. Ahmed. So it was a great opportunity. With your experience in engineering and business development, what do you think Africa needs to get ahead in innovation and technological advancement?
Yeah. So one of the guests that we have, Efosa Ojomo, he just published a book with Chris Christensen, and it's called The Prosperity Paradox. He's part of the Christensen Institute, and part of what they talk about is that there's this paradox where we've been fighting poverty through subsidies, through charities, things like that. But the idea that he says is that actually, it's through innovation that societies emerge. It's through new innovations and platform type of innovations that create whole economies and whole new markets that we did not know. So market creating innovations that economies emerge. So I think one of the things that we need is more investment in education, right? You need to get people trained. Because one of the things that we have as a problem in Africa is that we have an underdeveloped, underutilized human capital. I mean, how many genius children that can't go and get the education at the level of their potential?
There's been a challenge with education.
So I would say it depends of what your theory on education is, and also, I mean, we've had this. I'm sure we've had these conversations with other people as well. One of the things I think that people are starting to realize is that education is more than just learned knowledge and things that you rehash on a test, right? It is critical thinking. It is design thinking. It is kind of a blended curriculum where you get, you learn at your own pace, but you also learn entrepreneurship. You learn things that you can use. My experience, for example, in Morocco was about learning by heart, right? We learned things by heart, and we became really good at learning by heart. Like, I mean, anything you'd ask us, we'd just tell you automatically. And I think there's a part of it where, learning to code, learning technologies, learning entrepreneurship, critical thinking is really important.
It is.
How do you design? How do you develop? How do you think about problems and solving them is also needed. And, we have a human capital panel, and we've been talking to a lot of people in ed tech, but also just in developing human capital, which is whether it's training the workforce. And I'm seeing that things are changing.
Good.
People are awakening to the potential of changing the way the curriculum is based. Now, it will take a lot of courage from governments to want to mold their curriculum and their policies around these changes. But I'm optimistic because
We have to bypass governments somehow.
I mean, I stay neutral on that. I think any solution that succeeds needs a diverse set of stakeholders.
Right.
I don't think you can bypass anyone and make something sustainable.
I know.
At that level. But we are seeing entrepreneurs who before would not have thought about education as a place where technology could make a difference, that are now thinking about it that way and are now putting their talents, putting their networks to use in order to build ventures that can help education. Now, my hope for it is that it becomes something that is equal and accessible to all. It's very easy for it to become something only for those who have either the monetary funds or the resources to be able to get them. But I would hope that this is something that a lot of people can access, because it's only through that equality of access that we can really emerge as a continent.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think when you were talking about your experience in Morocco, I just thought about the kids back home in Uganda, who make wire cars, the cars, and that is technology, that is creation. But then you don't find those cars anywhere in the market. They are good toys. And we're not promoting these children. Yes, we take it for granted. They're making their own toys, but it's up to people like you at MIT to recognize that
I think,
and try to tap into their potential and help encourage the young population.
And honestly, I agree with you. It is the role of those who were endowed with privileges. I find myself privileged to even be here talking to you, to be at MIT. But I think it stresses the importance of an ecosystem. In Africa, we talk about it takes a village to raise a child.
Yes.
And I think it's the same thing when it comes to education, when it comes to innovation. It takes an ecosystem around the entrepreneur. It takes a supply chain that is capable of exporting these cars. It takes a manufacturing hub that is able to manufacture these toys at a price that is competitive. And it takes policies that look at that kind of creativity at a small age and say, this is something that we should nurture, because and that we should accept as entrepreneurship. You know, I know about Morocco, and when I was a kid in Morocco, I would see a lot of people around me, and I'll use the word hustle, but that work really hard to build businesses that we may not think of as the kind of tech Silicon Valley business. They may
Right.
not have the panache. They may not be even sexy enough, like people say. But there are businesses that feed families and that provide stability to a city. And so I think another thing is how do we define entrepreneurship? Is it the entrepreneurship model that we talk about in Silicon Valley with VCs and that type of thing? Or is it its own African-born and African-tailored entrepreneurship? And that goes back to the point that the best innovations on the continent are tailored to the needs of their customers.
Right.
So maybe a little bit about what we need to do with regards to education and entrepreneurship is that we also need to tailor that specifically to what the continent needs.
Right. So, Yusuf, thank you again for providing a platform to highlight Africa's innovation and economic potential. And I hope that people will listen to your message and work with the MIT Africa Club and work with the full, be a part of the ecosystem to promote Africa and African innovation. Our viewers can find more information on one of the largest Africa-centric conferences held outside of Africa at MIT.com. Learn and share best practices and strategies required to accelerate the scaling of impactful enterprises and innovations on the continent across sectors and create partnerships and collaborations. For more about Africa and the African diaspora, visit africa2u.org or send me an email at africa2u.vivian@gmail.com. And Yusuf, again, thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you so much, and we hope to see you there, and we hope to see all of your viewers there and hopefully learn from them.
Oh yes, I think I'll be there. Thank you for watching Africa to You. Till next time.